Right now I'm trying to pick something that I might want to replicate for y'all. This has a lot of options in it. So I'm going to pull this into Photoshop. I don't know if I want the boot texture or maybe this apple. Do y'all have a preference? Boot? I'm just, normally I wouldn't. Normally I don't need to switch this to grayscale, but I'm just gonna do it just so it's a little easier to see. It might speed up my process. That's not the right one, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it anyways. I'm gonna have to adjust the size of this so I can show you guys. Oops, that is not what I wanted to do. Give me a moment. Don't remember how to correct this, but whatever. There we go. All right, my two favorite tools of the trade are a 2B pencil and this tortillon blender. Just to make sure you guys can see the webcam. I imagine if I can see it, you guys can see it. So a lot of times, let me just start off with, I'm gonna do something a little smaller here. I'm gonna have to keep moving my hand out of the way because I don't have a whole lot of real estate on this desk. So you're gonna do your, establish your bounding space, your bounded space, right? So once I have that, a lot of times I will just go straight into the drawing with my tortillon blender. Get this out of the way again. Because a lot of times there's residual graphite on there, and then I will start mapping out my shape and proportion just based off of just using that residual graphite that's on there.
And that's that little paper stick thing, right?
Yep, that is
okay.
correct.
Awesome. I didn't want you to stop and have to type, so I unmuted real fast to ask.
Thank you. So there's not much on there right now, but so from here, I would just go back in. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you can't really see that, but there's a little bit of value. So I'm just going to go in lightly. I don't like to work too quickly with too much pressure because if I need to go back in and make some corrections, it's going to be easier to erase, or like I like to say, work subtractively at that point. Right now I'm establishing those darker values. It's usually a good place to start. Notice how I'm just kind of being a little loose with it, right? While I figure all this out. All that little detail can come in a little bit later. This doesn't matter if I'm working with graphite or paint, any medium. It's nice to just you start simple and then you can go back in and start carving out those details. There's really no point in starting like adding in all of this texture detail information in here, especially in these little shadowed areas. Because again, if I'm just going to go back in and black it out anyways, and there's really no point. I'm just wasting my time. I drew this a little big. So once you have a decent amount of value down, you can go back in and start pushing it around with your tortillon blender. So you can change up my angle here. In the areas that are darker, I know I can use a bit more pressure. So I generally do so, but then whenever I start getting to areas that I feel are going to be lighter in value, I don't use as much pressure. And the reasoning behind that is to avoid from shoving the graphite into the paper, into the fibers. When you press down really hard, everything gets really flat. And when those fibers get overly compressed, you're not able to work them too much anymore. They get overworked really quickly. So I tend to work a lot lighter, just be patient and just gradually build up those values. I'm going to have to go back in with the eraser in this area, pull out those final highlights, which is fine if you're working lightly. It's definitely doable.
How do you get all the graphite smudgy, yucky stuff off of those that thing you're using? Are you supposed to use the pencil sharpener?
No, actually, I don't even try to remove any of it. Because eventually you'll see what you're going to end up doing what I did if you make it a habit, where you just end up starting your next drawing with the residual graphite, and it'll eventually just work its way off of the blending stick on its own. So yeah, generally you don't need to. And then even when you're working on a drawing, you just keep moving around. If you feel like you're building up too much, then you can just move on to an area that you know is going to have should be darker, like right here, and you just start working that area, and just kind of gradually erase or remove that value from the blending stick. Right now I'm just paying attention to where those brighter highlights are, and I'm just avoiding those. Just kind of give you an idea where I'm at right now. Now I can go back in and keep pushing those darker values. And again, it's just going to be this back and forth process until you get that desired look. I'm using just medium pressure here, the side of the pencil. You don't want to go in with the tip of the pencil during this stage, because you're going to indent the paper, you're going to come on too strong. There's really no need to use the tip of the pencil until you get to those tight little detailed areas. So the side of the pencil seems to work the best. It gives you a bit more control. It forces you to work to be more patient. Wish I could set my camera up the other way. And whenever I'm drawing shading, I'm also looking at. I'm guessing you still see this thumbnail here. I'm looking at the form, right? How does this value bend, to the form itself? And I'm rendering it. My pencil strokes are mimicking that, right, to try to get that round curve. Thinking about what that form is, right? This is a boot, so this is the nose of the boot. Um, the base where it ties in, which would be down here, is being sewn to the sole, and this is being curved. It's curving upwards, and it's creating this actual toe to the boot. I'm just keeping all of that form in mind while I'm drawing as well, because that tends to determine how I render. That will help with those striations, especially when you get to texture. If you pay really close attention to that, um, just those simple changes in direction um, will kind of just lend to a very organic texture. And if you're doing it mimicking what's actually there in that form, it's going to make a lot more sense. It's going to speed up your process. You're going to kind of just end up creating that texture without even really trying to some degree. Just trying to see what that other highlight looks like. It's going to be a lot darker. So now I'm just going in with the tip of the pencil because I know I can go in and crispen up some of these edges to better define the form. I know those areas are going to get a lot darker. I might actually have to go back in with a 4B or even a 6B. And it is pretty important to change directions whenever you are shading. The reason behind that is if you only go in one direction, you eventually will end up with these striations, and it's because you're going in one direction. If you go two different directions, obviously you're layering at that point, but you're creating like this woven effect with your graphite. And if you just keep going and just keep changing direction, every 45 degrees or whatnot, it's really going to fill in very nicely. You're going to get a much better desired effect. So now I'm going to go in and blend these darker areas. A couple reasons behind that is, again, to obviously blend that area smoother, but I also want some of that residual graphite on my blending stick. So now I can go back into these areas that are a little bit more towards, not quite 50% gray, but a little bit darker. And I can just really start blending those and pushing those to the level they need to be at, or they should be at, When you get to some of these those softer transitions, it's going to be really easy to bring the values on really strong with an overwork it or push it too far with a pencil at this point. Obviously, I'm going to have to go back in and make some changes. With the pencil, but save those details for last. Make sure I'm not missing any comments. All right, cool. There's really almost no way to, without a blending stick of some sort, whether it be twisted up paper of your own creation, there's really no other way to capture texture in a precise manner. If you use your finger to try to blend, you can't have that sort of precision. It's going to get really messy really quickly. Not going to get that desired effect that you're going for. So things are starting to kind of smooth out a bit more. I guess I can go in and darken the eyelets. Forgot to get out my eraser. And I don't have one second. I got to step away real quick. All right, because I do not have my electric eraser here, and this is a small illustration. Sometimes you need like a really fine point on an eraser to create a detailed highlight. Sometimes you got to get creative, cut up your erasers so you have a bit of a point to it. If you can see that. And so now I'll go back in and I'm focusing in on a few of these areas where the highlight of this eyelet should be. In and around that area, there's a few highlights here. There's a brighter highlight here. Start pulling those back out just so I know to not work too hard in those areas. So I don't want to get them too dark. Can't really see what I'm doing here. It's okay if you go too large with it at first. You can push that value back into where it needs to be. I'm just going to go all the way around to kind of recarve out the shape of that eyelet. I'm going to pull out these highlights here again. What does this shape look like? This one's more of a circle right there. These are some weird, just organic kind of shapes. Sometimes you can just go in and dab your eraser. And you can pull out a few, different types of highlights. Oops. I am dragging my knuckle across the paper, creating more work for myself. So I'm looking at these little wrinkles here, right? I'm pulling out the peaks. At least I'm going to try to with my eraser, and then I'm going to go back in with my pencil and blending stick and start, refining them from there. This is kind of needs to be darker regardless. And again, it's the suggestion of texture. So, I'm not doing photoreal at this point. You just want to get it looking as close to your reference as possible. I'm not. I mean, I like photorealism as a fine artist, just as more of a challenging aspect. I don't really like it as an actual art form, just because might as well take a photo at that point. But I think most people who do it is more of a challenge, and that's their whole point, is they want it to be. You're just kind of showing off what their skill set is. It's nice to do every now and then. You got to challenge yourself. So right now, this is, see that again, kind of where I'm at. Starting to take form, right? So I'm going to go back in, and I'll just keep pushing those darker shadows and those darker midtones until I get what I'm looking for. So from here, I might actually pull out a 4B pencil. I encourage you all, part of this week is to play around with the value scale, right? Use heavy pressure and see how hard it is to create a gradient with the different type of pencils. Just varying that pressure, right? You'll notice with the higher the number of the B, the easier those values come on, right? You don't need as much pressure to get the same amount of the same value out of you normally would for a 2B and softer, or I guess harder. Sorry about that. So play around with all your pencils so you get a good feel for how much pressure they take, how much control you have of them. So from here, I would probably go into a 4B, and I'm just going to keep kind of darkening those shadowed areas. It's nice to establish those dark shadows earlier on because they kind of act as a gauge for the rest of the environment. can base everything else off of those values. I was using this to blend some colored pencils the other day, so I have a little bit of this red in there. It's not coming out completely, so I guess I'll just keep using the other side. You know, it's nice if you start with these Bs, you know, like a 2B and up. If you got to go back in and lift some of that graphite, it's going to be a lot easier to pull out those highlights again. Those H's, you know, there's too much. There's too much clay in them for my liking. To me, they're harder to work with. I mean, and they're not really meant for rendering in that regard. There are instances where you might want to use them to render if you want a more reflective quality to your graphite. But most of the time, they're really there for you to just uh, establish your gesture. You know, all that understudy. So this thing ends up becoming more of a drawing tool at some point than a simple blending stick. Because right now I'm just going back in and just pushing values where they need to be, like actually shoving them over where they need to be.
Ah, once I add that wall, I can no longer get into it.
Access it. You don't have that. Build a section around it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to maybe go all the way up.
Can access.
I'm just cleaning this up a little bit just for my own liking, so I can see where how everything's turning out basically. So you can start to see
I just had to see which one I could get it.
what that's looking like. So we're getting there. These areas here could be darker, right? Along this left side could be darker. Even this could be darker up here. So I'll keep playing around with that. Let's get a little bit closer, see what it's supposed to be, and then I'll probably call it quits. So I think you guys are getting a pretty good understanding for just how to gradually build up those values, how to work.
Let me see what I got.
Establishing shadows first. Don't be afraid if you kind of cover up some of those highlights. If you're working with a 2 or 4B pencil, again, I keep saying this, and you're working with light pressure, you're not just going in and gouging it right away. You should be able to pull those highlights back out. And so I'm just kind of shading around some of that texture I established. And that's one reason why you don't want to establish texture early on, is because if you kind of map all that information out, you're going to find yourself meticulously trying to render around it. That's going to slow you down so much, and you can't be working slowly in this industry and most industries.
65 ceilings.
Why are you not? Oh, there you go. There you go. And do it, you get. This one's coming together at least.
Yeah, man, I need more walls.
There we go, babe.
Hmm. Oh, so that's what I'm making.
Yeah, yours is bigger though.
Why is mine so much bigger?
Because you're doing this different. Mine is actually, see, here's the slope walls, left and right, and then, and then here's the ceiling. Now I will put hot pots on it.
I'm going to mute you, Barbara. Sorry about that. I'm noticing that a lot of this area here is a little darker than it needs to be. So I might go back in with this other eraser. I'm just going to kind of dab it. I use too much pressure to where I end up putting too much texture. You can even see what I'm doing here. anyways, it's pretty much where I'm going to stop for now. I don't want it to run too long. Just going to get a better angle here. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, sorry, Barbara. Yeah, sorry, not laughing at you, but I get your concern or your struggle to some degree. But yeah, hopefully you guys found this helpful. If you need any other demos along the way, don't forget to come into the Google Hangout sessions. Cameron's doing most of the morning ones. I'll be doing the evenings, and Cameron, I don't think he has a webcam, so you probably won't see these type of demos. But he does have Photoshop, and I think he works with Sketchbook Pro more than Photoshop. He's pretty good with rendering techniques on there at this point. And I will, if it's during the day and I'm at work, I'll probably just be doing showing you how to do it in Photoshop. But a lot of those same techniques translate. You know, it's just sometimes it's nice to see how you would actually do it with graphite versus Photoshop, because sometimes blending with Photoshop is a little bit different than graphite.